Even the sweetest of delicacies turns foul if there's simply too much. Cram the mouth full of the most exotic of victuals or the plainest of food, and if you can't crunch or chew, things come to a standstill, or worse. We've either seen it or been it. The eating contest at a fair, the varsity dare, and so on. It's all about too much of a good thing, eliminating its enjoyment. The same is true in the data world. It's plain that with the computer revolution, there has been an exponential increase in available data. The Economist observed years ago that in 2005, humans created 150 exabytes, that is, 1 billion gigabytes of data, and that by 2010, it was 1,200 exabytes. Last year, Cisco estimated that Internet protocol traffic would exceed the zettabyte, or 1,000 exabyte, threshold this year, powered by compound annual growth of 23%. It's at the very least breathtaking. It's hard enough to imagine storing all of this data, let alone actually processing it. Crunching the numbers is likely suffering as the mouth is simply too full. Not so, says the cynic. If the computing power that gave rise to this data deluge is increasing as quickly or more so, then there is definitely machine capacity to process the data. But again, there's a human element. It seems it's easier to create the data than it is to process it. Somebody somewhere has to realize the resource and respond with some sort of processing plan. Back in 2010, The Economist lamented that reams of data were sitting idle and in fact were vulnerable to theft. Clearly things haven't been static since then. If the pile of unprocessed data was large then, one can only imagine how many orphaned exabytes exist today. Absent a breakthrough on how to deal with the situation, it and we are vulnerable to a sort of new era intellectual choking. Faced with the choice of processing old data or new, we face the displacement dilemma. It's in a desperate effort to keep pace, we capitulate to the current. There is a direct connection with economic and financial analysis. When current data translate into instant movements that are worth millions, it's almost impossible to abstract from the inflow for an instant, as the opportunity cost is simply too high. Given how the incentives are stacked up, there's huge risk that we have been caught up in a high-frequency hijack. The displacement of structural truisms and tried and tested tendencies with today's info inundation and its real-time correlations and interactions threatens a form of neo-myopia that has few market anchors. It goes further. Factor in media coverage of worldwide events and the explosion of free online news sources, and there's a steady stream of information we never had before. Digesting this is difficult enough, but then consider that more media outlets are competing for our ever-decreasing attention span, and there's an incentive not just to be the first, but also the flashiest. If it's true that negative news sells better, the economic environment of the past 8 years has served up a feeding frenzy. The implications for financial market volatility should be evident. This is manifesting itself in markets today in a strange way. Consider the wedge between the Fed's view of the economy and just about everyone else's. Read the Fed's actions and statements, and it's clear that a growing and tightening economy on labor, physical capital, and productivity fronts requires a steady de-loosening of monetary policy. It's a growth story. Then there's the market view, where stock market plunges, collapsed commodity prices, and a general global repricing of risk is leading to a diametrically opposed conclusion. Recession is upon us. It's one thing to be drowning in data and arrive at conclusions that are variations on a theme. It's quite something else to end up on opposite ends of the spectrum. Factor in the effect of this divergence on sentiment, and the lack of clarity has potentially serious implications for the near-term outlook. The bottom line? Before us lies a sumptuous banquet table of data that's way too much to digest. in our haste to consume it, we could come to a damaging conclusion, unnecessarily, sort of a new paradox of thrift. Keynes would not be pleased. Until next week, I'm Peter Hall.